Hi there. My name is Amanda McCulloch, and I'm the Operations Director for the Data Visualization Society. I'm excited for our next installment of Viz Responsibly, our series talking about the responsible visualization of information and sharing information more broadly with different decision makers and the broader general public. Today, we're speaking with Professor Emily Oster from Brown University. She's someone who's been a published author trying to find ways to demystify data in different ways, oftentimes for parents, a group of which I actually include myself at this point in my life, and has started to tackle that same challenge related to COVID. Professor Oster, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit more just about your background, what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a health economist. I'm a professor at Brown. I work on trying to understand the health choices people make and also on statistical methods. And in my non-professor hat world, I write books, as you said, about pregnancy and parenting. And sort of my whole thing is about trying to translate academic work into a language that people can understand, but also get really deep into the details.
Excellent. So I know that you launched recently a new website called explaincovid.org. Can you tell us a little bit about this new site and the initiative?
Yeah, so we launched this site because we were when I sort of looked out at the COVID landscape, I saw a lot of people trying to explain epidemiology, so trying to help people understand R naught and what are these curves going to look like, but not a lot of work where people were trying to understand how does the virus work. So really getting into like, how do I get this? Like, why does it matter to wash my hands? And I think that we sort of felt like that piece was really missing from a lot of the conversation, and that sometimes we were talking to scientists and they were explaining things that were right, but maybe not explaining them in a side of the lab. And so the goal of the site is to sort of be a partnership between people who are doing the hard science, who are actually doing the research on COVID, and some people who can help with the sort of translational piece. And with the hopes that people will come to the site, and when they have a question like, well, how does the virus work? What is the details of treatment? What is a vaccine? How much progress have we made on vaccines? And to really get into the details there, but again, in a way that hopefully a lot of people can understand.
Interesting. So who are you collaborating with around creating content for the site? Because it sounds like you're tackling a lot of different kind of interdisciplinary approaches to making sense of this disease.
Yeah, so we have a team that includes me. I don't have any particular knowledge about COVID, but I know some general stuff about health and some stuff about how data works. And then there are a number of PhDs and postdocs, many of whom work in a lab at MGH, a few of them at MIT. We have a few doctors. There's like a little expert panel on our Slack channel full of people who do immunology and pathology and who are working on the virus. And so that is a group that kind of creates a lot of the initial content. And then I have actually also a bunch of people, more like undergraduates or people who are writers, who are trying to then help me kind of translate that content into something that is more readable. And we sort of go back and forth. It's been super interesting to sort of see how that process can work, and when we have more bumps in the road, but I think we're making some progress.
What to actually tackle and write about for the site? The world of COVID is wide and varied.
Yes, the world of COVID is wide and varied. And so when we think about what we want to cover, we're sort of trying to do both some very basic kind of explainers, like there are some big questions people want to know about. How is it treated? How do vaccines work? But then also we've been trying to get into like, what did you see in the news today? So, people will read something and they'll say, oh, like antigen tests. That sounds like a new thing. I don't really know what that is. This is a place you can go. You can see something we've written about that also cites back to some of these longer form explainers. So you can say, how do I have context for this stuff that I'm seeing in the news? And that's part of where we're trying to be.
Nice. I like meeting people kind of where they are on small bits of information and then the deep dives if they actually want the deeper information. I know you've spent, and we talked at the beginning about demystifying kind of the challenge of conflicting information that's given to pregnant women and to parents about, I'm looking at all this science and this data and these studies, and we're in a world of preprints right now, I feel like, on science about COVID and about related issues. What do you feel like is different about taking the same lens of making sense of science for COVID
I think the main thing is just the degree of uncertainty. So, there are always sort of places where I wish in pregnancy and parenting where I wish the data was better and I wish that we had, better, better information, more randomized, bigger, whatever. Basic facts are missing, right? So if you want to say like what is the risk of mortality from the virus for different groups, we kind of have no idea. And that kind of very basic uncertainty, that is really hard to write about. And it's very hard to help people think about how can I make decisions when like a tremendous amount is unknown. Say like, yeah, it's possible that COVID causes something about your toe or not. We don't really know. I mean, that's one where it's probably not that important. But still, it's like, there's just the things basic things we don't know. And I think that's been the hardest piece is how do you write around such intense uncertainty and help people move forward and make choices, even though there are very few places where we'll be able to say this is something we know for sure.
Well, you have a newsletter on Substack that I know a lot of parents subscribe to. And I remember maybe it was last week, the week before, you had an article all about the challenges of making sense of the decisions we have to make about childcare and visiting grandparents. And I mean, I'm currently speaking to you from the home of my parents, the grandparents of my toddler, and we clearly made our own set of decisions on what we would do in this environment. How do you kind of make sense of and help advise people when there are so many levels of different pieces of uncertainty, where every single piece of a decision has uncertainty wrapped around it, and it almost feels like you hit analysis paralysis?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I really emphasize in that newsletter, which I think is really important first step, is framing a smaller question that you're asking. So, and really trying to think about, should I do this or should I do this? I think part of the analysis paralysis, which is a phrase I really like, is that people are sort of thinking about this, like they're asking the question, what should I do? But like, what should I do is not a question that you can really answer. Should I go to my parents next week? Or should I go to my parents later? Or should I go to my parents never? Those are concrete questions that you can answer. And I think that by helping people recognize that they need to really articulate the question they're asking, I think that's kind of, in some ways, the most important way to think about moving forward.
All right, so I lost you at my last question. We will have to I think, restart that and have Elijah cut that piece out. So if we just want to take a pause and just start at that question again and wrap things up, we can go ahead and cut out that middle section of the recording.
Okay. So we'll do this last question about grandparents and childcare.
Yeah, why don't I go ahead and ask it again, just to make it easy.
Great.
For an easy cut for Elijah. The joys of my parents' Wi-Fi and learning what that looks like here in Rockford,
Yes.
Illinois.
Indeed.
All right. So I know you have a really popular newsletter that goes out on Substack that a lot of parents, including myself, subscribe to. And a week ago, 2 weeks ago, you talked about the challenges of deciding whether or not to visit grandparents or how to approach decisions around childcare. And that adds the complexity of lots of different pieces of information someone is using to make that decision, all of which have uncertainty wrapped around it. So how do we kind of help people move through and past that analysis paralysis you feel because of all of the uncertainty?
Yeah. So I wrote, one of the main things I emphasized in that newsletter was the idea of trying to be really explicit about the question you're asking. And I think part of the analysis paralysis, as you say, which I really like that phrase, part of that comes from the fact that people are often framing these questions just like, what should I do? Like, what should I do? And what should I do? That's a hard question to answer. Like about what? And so I think if you can sort of narrow into what is the question you're asking, is it, should I go to my parents? Should I see my parents this weekend, or should I wait 3 weeks? Or is the question, should I see my parents this weekend, or should I wait 6 months? At least if you sort of said the question like that, then it is easier to say, okay, well, what are the alternatives? How do I evaluate risks and benefits to these different options? And I think particularly in the face of so much uncertainty and so many different elements of uncertainty, the being explicit about what you're asking at least lets you limit the number of pieces of uncertainty that you're dealing with in any one moment, and can sort of sometimes help you control a bit better how you're thinking about it.
Sure. I mean, we sat down, I think, and had that same conversation of what are the things that matter to us, and if we don't go now, when we haven't been around anyone else for 3 weeks, when will we go back
When are
to the
you going to go?
Midwest? Yeah.
Yeah,
And so it
that's really
became that
important.
trade-off of what are A, B, and C, and what are those different options. And I think that's a great framework for people to think through, not of it being all or nothing, because I think we're definitely all hitting a bit of quarantine fatigue, but rather these ideas around harm reduction and what level of risk are you willing to tolerate, which is tough. I know one of the challenges we've seen in charting and plotting information about COVID is also that uncertainty. And I'm curious, since we talk a lot about data visualization, what you think the role of graphs and charts have been in making sense of COVID, and also maybe where they've been challenging or misled people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there have been some some really nice data visualizations that have come out. So I think early on, this idea of flattening the curve, that was sort of an initially pretty helpful visualization. I think part of the thing that's been hard is that when you put something down in a graph like that, people tend to think that you are more sure about it. And particularly on these modeling graphs, it's very difficult to quantify the amount of uncertainty in the models, so there's some standard errors, but the standard errors that's not actually reflective of the standard errors of the model. I don't even know what that is. And so in that sense, the kind of visualizations can provide a false sense of I don't know, a lot about how do you quantify the uncertainty. I think part of the problem is when you talk about something like these models, basically the uncertainty covers the real line. And so it could be like any number. And so that's a hard thing to think about visualizing.
And I know you've started sharing. Well, I know you've started sharing some charts and graphs through your own Instagram and other spaces. How are you deciding what information to convey visually or through these kind of longer format text explainers?
I don't know. This is something we're still working through. Honestly, this is a startup question. So we try to sort of figure out what pieces would be helpful for people to understand visually. But we've gone with a lot of text, I think, partly because we've struggled a little bit with, how do you convey things in a way that are helpful but not misleading.
No, I think it's a big challenge, and one that we've talked a lot about in the data visualization community on how do you kind of ethically and thoughtfully graph things when plotting things implies a certain degree of certainty and truthiness. That people see it and they say, well, this is what's going to happen. When in all actuality, if you tell a model to plot a curve with a certain shape, you are inevitably going to see that shape, regardless of what the future might hold, which creates a lot of challenges, I think, for broader understanding what those models and forecasts and even what the past case numbers mean.
Totally right.
Professor Oster, this was delightful to get to talk to you, connect with you, hear about your work. If people want to find COVID Explained, where do they find that? How do they follow you in your project?
So you can find me at Brown. The website is explaincovid.org. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Prof. Emily Oster, and on Substack at Parent Data. I don't know, just Google me, I'm around.
And we'll go ahead and we'll link to a couple of the places they can find both Explain COVID as well as some of the other ways to connect with you and your research, both in the comments and in our Nightingale article. It was great to speak with you today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll stay connected and hope people check out explaincovid.org to learn more about all the different science and different bits and pieces that we need to understand as we make different decisions that don't always involve looking at a chart or a graph and maybe require a little bit more in-depth reading. With that, we'll wrap up for today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.